April 24th, 1863. Dear Diary, I thought catching Thomas Mitchell ended our spy problem. I was wrong. This morning I found a note in my coffee cup. Your secrets are still not safe. A friend. The handwriting was different from Mitchell's. Elegant, educated, familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. Someone else had been reading these very words. Someone who knew exactly how I took my morning coffee. Someone with access to my private dining area. But the real shock came when I realized where I'd seen that handwriting before. Mary found me staring at the note, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Abraham, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I showed her the message. Her face went pale as she examined the careful script. This handwriting, she whispered. It looks like, but that's impossible. Like what, Mary? Like whose? She set the note down with trembling hands. Like Willie's tutor, Mr. Hamilton. But he died in the typhoid outbreak last year, just after Willie. My blood ran cold. Edward Hamilton had indeed died, or so we'd been told. He'd been Willie's private tutor, a scholarly man from Virginia who'd come highly recommended. He'd had access to our private quarters, had eaten meals with our family, had been present for countless intimate conversations. Every parent knows the trust we place in those who care for our children. The betrayal cuts deeper than any military defeat. If Hamilton was alive, if he'd faked his death during the typhoid outbreak, then he'd been the perfect spy, someone we'd mourned, someone whose absence we'd attributed to tragedy, someone who'd already heard our family's deepest secrets. Mary, I need you to think carefully. What exactly did we tell Hamilton about? What conversations did he overhear? Her face crumbled as the implications hit her. Everything, Abraham. Our arguments about the war, your meetings with the generals, your doubts about everything. He was there when Willie was sick, when you were making those terrible decisions about the war while our son was dying. That's when Secretary Hay burst through our dining room doors, his face flushed with panic and something worse, betrayal. Mr. President, Mrs. Lincoln, forgive the intrusion, but we have a crisis. Thomas Mitchell, he's escaped. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. Escaped? How? He was under guard in the White House basement. Sir, that's just it. The guard was found unconscious. Someone got Mitchell out, someone who knew exactly where he was being held, someone who had access to the building's service tunnels. Mary grabbed my arm. Abraham, the note. It wasn't a warning, it was a boast. Hamilton is alive. He freed Mitchell, and he's telling us he's still here, still watching. I looked around our dining room, the room where we'd shared countless family meals, where Willie had practiced his reading lessons with Hamilton, where I'd often worked on speeches while Mary tended to domestic matters. How many conversations had Hamilton overheard? How many state secrets had been discussed within his earshot? Hey, I want every entrance to the White House sealed except the main gate. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization. And I want a complete review of every death recorded during the typhoid outbreak. If Hamilton faked his death, there might be others. But even as I gave these orders, I knew we were already too late. Hamilton had a head start of almost a year, and he knew our building, our routines, our vulnerabilities better than we knew them ourselves. That afternoon, I discovered just how deep Hamilton's deception ran, and it was worse than I'd imagined. April 25th, 1863. Dear Diary, I spent the night in Willie's old room, searching through his belongings for any clue about Hamilton's true nature. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my son's death. Hidden in Willie's schoolbooks were small pencil marks, barely visible annotations in the margins. At first, they appeared to be innocent study notes, but as I examined them more closely, a pattern emerged. Hamilton had been using Willie's textbooks to encode messages. Geography lessons contained troop movement information. History passages were marked with numbers corresponding to military unit strengths. Even Willie's beloved poetry books contained coded references to our family's daily schedules. My son had been unknowingly carrying Confederate intelligence in his schoolbooks. Hamilton had turned an innocent child into an unwitting courier of enemy secrets. But worse was yet to come. In Willie's personal diary, a small leather journal I'd never had the heart to read after his death, I found entries that broke my heart and ignited my rage. Mr. Hamilton asked me again today about Papa's night meetings. He says it's because he cares about Papa's health and wants to make sure Papa gets enough sleep. I told him about the generals who visit late, and about how Papa sometimes cries when he reads the soldier reports. Mr. Hamilton patted my head and said I was a good boy for caring about Papa. Hamilton had manipulated my dying son, had used Willie's love for me as a weapon against our cause. While typhoid fever ravaged Willie's body, Hamilton had been mining his innocent observations for intelligence. I wept then, alone in Willie's room, surrounded by the remnants of a childhood that had been poisoned by espionage. The grief I'd carried for my son now mixed with a rage I'd never experienced, not just at Hamilton's betrayal, but at my own blindness. But that's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, the same careful, measured steps I remembered from Hamilton's days in our home. The footsteps paused outside Willie's door. I quickly extinguished my lamp and pressed myself against the wall beside the window. The door handle turned slowly, silently. A figure entered the room, tall, thin, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the layout intimately. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, I saw him clearly. Edward Hamilton, alive, healthy, and holding a small leather satchel. He moved directly to Willie's desk and began searching through drawers I'd already examined. Whatever he was looking for, it wasn't in the obvious places. He knew something about Willie's room that I didn't. I stepped out of the shadows. Looking for something, Edward? He spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. Mr. President, I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Figure what out? That you faked your death? That you used my dying son as a spy? Or that you've been reading my private diary for over a year? Hamilton smiled, a cold expression I'd never seen during his time as Willie's tutor. All of the above, I'm afraid. Though I must say, your diary has been incredibly helpful. Your self-doubt, your guilt, your moments of weakness, President Davis has found them quite illuminating. You know, Abraham, may I call you Abraham? After all, we've been so intimate, in a way. I've read your deepest thoughts, your darkest fears. I probably know you better than Mary does. The casual use of my name, the implied intimacy, was designed to unnerve me. But I learned something important from our previous encounter with Thomas Mitchell. These Confederate operatives relied on psychological manipulation because they couldn't match our military strength. What are you really here for, Hamilton? If you just wanted to gloat, you could have done that from a safe distance. Oh, but I'm not here to gloat. I'm here for this. He pulled a small key from his pocket, a key I recognized with horror. It belonged to my private safe, the one where I kept my most sensitive documents. The one that only Mary and I were supposed to know about. Willie told me about Papa's special box, Hamilton said, reading my expression perfectly. Children notice everything, you know. He saw you opening it late at night, saw where you hid the key. Sweet boy was so proud of his observational skills. My legs nearly gave out. The safe contained everything: military plans, diplomatic correspondence, financial arrangements with European allies, and most damaging of all, detailed assessments of Union generals and their capabilities. How long? I asked quietly. How long have I been copying documents from your safe? Almost from the beginning of my employment here. Willie's illness was convenient timing. Everyone was so focused on his health that nobody noticed his tutor working late hours. But then Hamilton said something that revealed the true scope of the Confederate operation. Of course, I wasn't working alone. You don't really think one tutor could manage an intelligence operation of this scope, do you? My heart sank. Who else? Oh, Abraham. You're still thinking too small. This isn't about individual spies. This is about a complete infiltration. We haven't just been reading your diary or stealing your documents. We've been shaping your decisions. The room seemed to spin around me. What do you mean, shaping my decisions? Think about it. Your cabinet meetings where crucial decisions were made. The advice you received from trusted advisors. The intelligence reports that influenced your military strategy. How many of those were actually authentic? And how many were carefully crafted to push you toward decisions that served Confederate interests? The horrible implications crashed over me. Not only had they been stealing our secrets, they'd been feeding us false information, manipulating our strategy, potentially causing military defeats that cost thousands of lives. The Battle of Bull Run, I said, pieces falling into place. The intelligence that suggested Confederate forces were weaker than expected. Completely fabricated, Hamilton confirmed. As was the information that led you to delay certain attacks, to redirect troops away from vulnerable Confederate positions, to trust generals who were either incompetent or compromised. I thought of all the young men who had died because of decisions made on false intelligence, all the families destroyed because Confederate spies had manipulated our strategy. The weight of those deaths settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. But Hamilton had made one crucial mistake. He'd revealed the scope of the operation while still within my grasp. And he'd underestimated how much I'd learned from our encounter with Thomas Mitchell. "Edward," I said calmly, "you've told me a great deal. But there's something you don't know." "Oh, and what's that?" "Thomas Mitchell didn't just confess to his own activities. He told me about the entire network, including you." Hamilton's confident expression flickered. "Impossible. Thomas didn't know about me. The cells were kept separate for security reasons." "Were they?" "Because Thomas mentioned a Confederate operative who had access to my family's private quarters, someone who'd been gathering intelligence for over a year, someone who'd supposedly died but was actually very much alive." I moved toward Willie's window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. In the courtyard below, Hamilton could see uniformed soldiers surrounding the White House. "You see, Edward, I've learned something important about fighting a shadow war. Sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've won in order to discover the full extent of their operation." Hamilton's hand moved toward his jacket again, but I was ready for that. "I wouldn't if I were you. Those soldiers down there have orders to shoot on sight if they see any threatening movements in this room, and they're watching very carefully." But Hamilton's next words revealed that the conspiracy went even deeper than I'd imagined. "Mr. President, you're making a mistake. I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to save your life." "Save my life?" "By spying on my family, by using my dying son as an intelligence source, by trying to end this war before it destroys everything we both care about." "Abraham, listen to me. There are forces at work here that neither you nor President Davis fully understand. The spy network, the manipulation, the false intelligence, it's not coming from Richmond." I stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a third party that wants this war to continue indefinitely. A group of powerful interests that profit from the conflict, that benefit from keeping America divided and weakened." "You're lying. This is another manipulation." "Am I?" "Think about it, Abraham. Why would the Confederacy want to prolong a war they're losing? Why would they benefit from feeding you false intelligence that makes your decisions less effective but not disastrously so? Why keep the conflict balanced on a knife's edge instead of pushing for decisive victory?" Hamilton moved slowly toward Willie's desk, his hands visible, non-threatening. "There's a group of European financiers working with certain American industrialists who have invested heavily in both sides of this conflict. They make money on every bullet fired, every cannon cast, every uniform sewn. They don't want either side to win quickly. They want maximum devastation and maximum profit. And you're telling me this because? Because I've been playing a triple game. Yes, I'm a Confederate agent. But I'm also trying to expose the manipulation that's been controlling both our governments. The real enemy isn't wearing blue or gray. They're wearing expensive suits in New York and London banking houses." I wanted to dismiss his claims as desperate lies, but pieces began fitting together in disturbing ways. The prolonged nature of the conflict, the seeming inability of either side to achieve decisive victory despite clear advantages at various points, the mysterious flow of supplies and funding that kept both armies fighting even when their resources should have been exhausted. "Even if what you're saying is true, you still used my son. You still violated my family's trust." "Yes, I did. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." He was a remarkable child, Abraham. Intelligent, curious, kind. Using him was the hardest thing I've ever done in service to any cause. Hamilton's voice broke slightly, and for the first time since entering the room, he seemed genuinely human rather than coldly professional. "But I did it because I believed it would help end this war faster, with fewer casualties on both sides. I was wrong about the nature of the conspiracy, but I wasn't wrong about wanting to protect innocent lives." That's when we heard voices in the hallway. Urgent, angry voices that didn't belong to White House staff. "Mr. President," Hamilton said quietly, "we need to leave this room. Now." "Why?" "Those are my security men." "No, sir, they're not. Listen carefully to the accents, to the terminology they're using. Those are the people I've been trying to protect you from." I listened more carefully to the voices outside Willie's door. Hamilton was right. The speech patterns were subtly different, more formal, with the careful diction of educated men trying to sound like common soldiers. Who are they? Agents of the banking consortium. They've realized that both Thomas Mitchell and I have been compromised. They're here to tie up loose ends. The door handle rattled as someone tested it from outside. Then came the sound of metal against metal, lock picks. There's a servant's staircase behind Willie's bookshelf, I whispered. Mary showed it to me years ago. It connects to the kitchen levels. Hamilton nodded grimly. After you, Mr. President. As we slipped through the hidden passage, I couldn't help but notice the irony. I was escaping through my own home with a Confederate spy who claimed to be protecting me from a conspiracy that supposedly controlled both sides of the war. The servant's staircase was narrow and dark, lit only by occasional windows. Behind us, we could hear the intruders entering Willie's room, their frustrated voices as they realized we'd escaped. How many of them? I whispered as we descended. At least 6 in the building, possibly more outside. They're professionals, European mercenaries, mostly. Very different from Confederate or Union military personnel. We reached the kitchen level, but Hamilton grabbed my arm before I could enter the main corridor. Wait. Listen. More voices, coming from the direction of the main White House kitchens. We were surrounded. But that's when Hamilton revealed something that changed everything I thought I knew about the war. Mr. President, there's something else you need to know. About Willie's death. Even in our desperate situation, the mention of my son's death stopped me cold. What about Willie? The typhoid outbreak wasn't natural. It was deliberately introduced into the White House water supply by agents of the banking consortium. They needed to create chaos, to distract you during a crucial period of military planning. The words hit me like physical blows. You're saying Willie was murdered? I'm saying Willie was collateral damage in an operation designed to weaken your decision-making capabilities during the Peninsula Campaign. The typhoid was targeted. It was supposed to make you sick, not kill your son. But children are more vulnerable. Pure fury coursed through me, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just at Hamilton, not just at the Confederate spy network, but at the faceless financiers who had murdered my child for profit. How long have you known this? I suspected almost immediately. The timing was too convenient, the strain of typhoid too specific. But I didn't have proof until recently, when I intercepted communications between the banking consortium and their field agents. I leaned against the stone wall of the servants' corridor, overwhelmed by grief and rage. Willie hadn't died from a random disease. He'd been murdered by men who saw him as an acceptable loss in their profit-driven conspiracy. But with the grief came clarity. These people, whoever they were, had killed my son, manipulated both sides of a devastating war, and were now hunting me through my own home. They had revealed themselves as the true enemy. Hamilton, I don't trust you. I may never trust you. But right now, you're the only one who seems to know who our real enemies are. I understand, sir. What do you want to do? I want to survive this night. And then I want to find every person responsible for Willie's death and make them pay. The voices were getting closer. We had to move. Hamilton led us through a maze of service corridors I'd never known existed in my own home. The White House, I realized, had been designed with multiple layers of security passages, and our enemies knew about them too. Where are we going? I whispered. The old wine cellar. There's a tunnel that connects to the Treasury building. If we can reach it, we can get you to safety and contact loyal military personnel. And then we figure out how to expose a conspiracy that's been manipulating American politics for years, and how to end this war on our terms instead of theirs. But as we approached the wine cellar, we discovered that our enemies were one step ahead of us. The cellar door was already open. Light flickered from within, not the electric lighting that had recently been installed, but the warm glow of oil lamps. Someone was waiting for us. Hamilton put a restraining hand on my arm. This could be a trap. Everything tonight has been a trap, but we don't have many options left. As we approached the cellar entrance, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. President? Mr. Hamilton? Please, come down. We need to talk." It was Secretary Stanton. My own Secretary of War was sitting in my wine cellar at past midnight, calmly waiting for us. "Edwin," I called as we descended the stairs. "What are you doing here? How did you know about the tunnel?" Stanton looked up from where he sat among the wine racks, his face grave in the lamplight. "I've known about the tunnel for some time, Abraham. Just as I've known about Mr. Hamilton's true identity, about Thomas Mitchell's network, and about the banking consortium that's been pulling all our strings. Hamilton tensed beside me. How long have you known? Longer than you might think, shorter than I should have. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Edwin, I need to know. Are you part of this conspiracy, or are you fighting it? Stanton stood slowly, his hands visible and empty. Abraham, I've been fighting it for months. The banking consortium approached me last year, tried to recruit me with promises of massive post-war reconstruction contracts. When I refused, they tried to have me removed from the cabinet through political pressure. The calls for your resignation, I said, understanding. The newspaper campaigns questioning your competence. All orchestrated by men who profit from chaos. But what they didn't understand is that some of us still believe in the Union, still believe in the principles we're fighting for. Hamilton looked between us. So what's the plan? Stanton unrolled a map on one of the wine barrels. We're going to end this war, but not the way any of our enemies expect. We're going to expose the banking conspiracy, eliminate their influence over both governments, and force a conclusion that serves American interests instead of European financial markets. How? By using their own methods against them. Misinformation, false intelligence, manipulation of their communication networks. Mr. Hamilton, you're going to continue operating as a Confederate agent, but now you'll be feeding them information we want them to have. And me? I asked. You, Mr. President, are going to make a series of decisions that will appear to be strategic mistakes, but will actually be setting a trap for everyone who's been manipulating this war. For the first time in months, I felt something other than crushing responsibility and grief. I felt the stirring of hope, not just for military victory, but for justice. For Willie, for all the sons and fathers who had died because of men who saw profit in their suffering. April 26, 1863, dawn. Dear Diary, I write these words as the sun rises over a Washington that looks the same but feels completely different. Last night, I learned that the war I thought I was fighting was only part of a larger conflict, a battle for the soul of not just America, but of democracy itself. Willie didn't die from a random disease. He was murdered by men who calculated that his death would weaken my resolve and serve their financial interests. That knowledge burns in my chest like a coal, but it also clarifies everything I must do. The spy who I thought was my enemy turns out to be fighting the same shadowy forces that killed my son. The Secretary of War I've trusted all along has been conducting his own secret war against our true enemies. And the diary I thought was private has become a weapon in a conflict I'm only now beginning to understand. But here's what our enemies don't understand. They've made a crucial mistake. They've shown me their true face, and now I know exactly what I'm fighting against. The war that was meant to preserve the Union will become the war that exposes and destroys the forces that profit from division and chaos. The grief they tried to use to weaken me will become the fury that drives their defeat. Tonight, I begin writing different diary entries. Entries designed to be read by enemy eyes. Entries that will feed false information into their networks and lead them into traps of our making. But these words, these true thoughts, I write for history. For my son Willie, whose death will not be meaningless. For every soldier who has died not knowing that his sacrifice served hidden masters. For every family torn apart by a war prolonged for profit. The men who killed my son think they understand power. They think money and manipulation are the ultimate weapons. They're about to learn what real power looks like when it's wielded by a father seeking justice for his murdered child. The candle burns bright as dawn breaks. Today, the real war begins.